Nietzsche on how to create yourself. Suppose one night, when you are tired and unable to sleep, a voice you do not recognize whispers to you from a dark corner of the room. It says, "This life, exactly as you have lived it, you will live again every pain, every breath, every small cowardice, and every small courage on an endless loop." Would you collapse in dread? Or would you say to that voice, "You are a god. I have never heard anything more divine"? If your answer makes your stomach tighten, it might be because you sense what he sensed. You are not yet the author of your days. You are a character written by habits you did not choose, a chorus of parents and teachers and algorithms humming through your mind. The stranger in your room knows this about you. He is not a ghost. He is a challenge. And his name, if he requires one, is Nietzsche. There is a reason his philosophy arrives like a storm on a clear afternoon. It does not ask you to agree. It offers you a hammer, and not to destroy senselessly, but to tap along the pillars of your life and listen for hollow places. The hammer is not violence. It is audibility. It helps you hear where your convictions ring like bronze and where they crumble like plaster. After you hear, you must dare the unthinkable. Perhaps the self you defend so passionately is a half-finished sculpture that someone else abandoned. To create yourself, this is not a motivational slogan. It is a demand that marks you for exile. You cannot create while serving two masters, the hunger to be approved and the hunger to be real. If you think you can, ask yourself why the words "be yourself" feel both comforting and suspicious, like advice designed to keep you exactly the way you already are. Nietzsche did not trust the cozy versions of authenticity. He suspected that much of what we call our values are customs in costume, that our conscience might be a watchdog trained by a weary culture to bark at any adventure. He suspected that our pity for ourselves disguises a deeper cruelty. We would rather remain sick than risk the cure. He learned this the hard way, not in lecture halls, but in the volcanic solitude of his own body. Migraines like lightning storms, eyes that failed, friendships that snapped and smoked. The future offered no applause. He was a scholar who walked away from the security of the academy, a disciple who broke with the idol he loved, a man who wrote for the day after tomorrow and the day after that. While the century around him arranged itself politely into progress, he walked in the Alps and listened to the wind hammer the rock. He was not trying to become original. He was trying to become honest. Honesty is not the hygiene of ideas. It is the courage to ask what your reverence hides. What do you call noble because you are afraid to examine it? Why do you call certain desires sin and others duty? Who profits when you feel ashamed of your strength? He would not say you were fallen. He would say you are captured by a story that teaches you to tame yourself. Call it virtue, and fear the voice that says yes too loudly. We prefer rules because they make fear feel like wisdom. We prefer roles because they make exhaustion feel like duty. We tell ourselves that suffering is noble if it keeps us obedient. Nietzsche thought this bargain left us half alive. The self as we inherit it is a museum of other people's conclusions. The phrases are antique, the air is stale, and you are the polite guide pointing at relics of value you do not feel. If you created yourself, the museum would become a workshop. The relics would be raw materials. You would not worship your gifts. You'd use them. You would choose your ancestors. You would choose your wounds. This does not mean inventing a new costume and calling it me. It means finding the seam where the costume attaches to your skin and pulling until it hurts. You must learn to mistrust your most automatic indignations. You must learn to respect impulses you have learned to shame. Ambition, solitude, laughter. It is a frightening operation, because your defense system will call any deviation treason. It will enlist the faces you love to read your charges. Selfish, arrogant, disloyal, naive. Nietzsche knew the accusation before you do. Self-creation is a luxury of the privileged, an excuse to ignore duty. But he answered in advance. Most duties have already ignored you. They do not know your shape. They only know the shapes they can use. How does one begin? He did not hand out 10 steps. He offered images like lanterns. He pictured the spirit passing through metamorphosis, not as spiritual decor, but as a series of fights with the dragon that stands guard over your freedom. He gave that dragon a name, Thou Shalt, the tyranny of inherited obligations glowing on its scales. The first creature you must become is not a warrior. It is a camel. The camel kneels. It begs for burdens. It says, load me. It takes on disciplines, hardships, deserts. Why? Because the camel knows that lightness without weight is vacuous. You cannot become sovereign over yourself if you have never served anything difficult. The camel stage is apprenticeship to gravity. You learn patience, endurance, and the deep silence in which your real questions begin to speak. Without this kneeling, a later rebellion becomes mere tantrum. Nietzsche, often seen as a cheerleader for rebellion, insists first on heavy training. The camel's submission is not servility. It is the gathering of strength. But the desert does its work. After long days under someone else's commandments, after the body has discovered its resources and the mind has discovered its limits, a second creature appears. In the sand, among the bleached bones of old loyalties, the camel becomes a lion. The lion does not ask for permission. The lion says, I will. The lion confronts the dragon, Thou shalt, and snaps. Not because rules are evil, but because second-hand rules cannot rule you forever. To create yourself, you must say a holy no to the heaviest command. You shall obey. The lion's no is not mere negation. It clears sacred space. It is an act of hygiene, not vandalism. Without it, there is no room to plant anything new. And still, the lion is not enough. The lion can win the desert, but the lion cannot create a garden. The third creature arrives as a surprise. A child. The child does not argue. The child plays. The child says yes to the world, not because it is perfect, but because it is alive. Now, the world is not a courtroom, but a playground for inventing rules, for building and breaking and laughing. The child is not naive. The child is creation without cynicism, a new beginning, a second innocence, earned through experience. This is the sketch on the wall of a cave, a sequence of silhouettes, camel, lion, child. It is both a map and a warning. Nothing guarantees you will survive the desert. Nothing guarantees your no will avoid becoming bitterness. Nothing guarantees your yes will be more than an aesthetic pose. But if the figures haunt you, it is because you already know where you tend to camp. You already know which creature you refuse to become, and why. What if, instead of searching for a true self, like a lost object, you treated yourself as a work of art that will never be finished? What if your most moral feelings were examined not for their purity, but for their use? What if gratitude to your past did not compete with betrayal of it? What if the only way to honor what made you was to break with it where it thwarts you? There is a final test. If the demon returned tonight and offered you your days again, not cleaned up, not edited, but raw and circular, could you eventually learn to answer yes? The question is not a threat. It is a measure. It asks whether your life is being built in such a way that you would choose it, not once, but eternally. If that sounds impossible from where you stand, then Nietzsche's invitation begins here. Stop waiting to be discovered, and begin the craft of becoming irresistible to yourself. The desert darkens. The dragon sputters. The ground under your ordinary routines feels less solid. Not because someone else is about to give you a life plan, but because the phrases that held you together are cracking, letting in air. You can hear the whisper again, but it is not a demon this time. It is a question that sounds like a promise. If I am not what they made me, what shall I dare to make? The first sediment to shift is the sense that your motives are pure and transparent. They are not. Nietzsche did not think we are liars. He thought we are interpreters who forget that we are interpreting. We tell ourselves a story about our goodness, a plausible story, and then we kneel inside it as though it were the only shelter from the storm. Not because we are bad, but because we are tired. He is gentler and harsher than his caricature lets on. He does not shout, "Be wicked." He whispers, "Look closer." What if your moral fervor conceals a disguised resentment? What if your public humility is how you take revenge on the people you envy by calling their power oppressive and your weakness holy? He thought this resentment had a genealogy. It is not personal. It is historical. In earlier times, he says, the noble called their flourishing good, and the sickly their limitations bad. Later, the powerless turned the vocabulary inside out and called the strengths of others evil. This was not a conspiracy. It was a triumph of survival. It was creative. It was also a mutation that made us suspicious of our own vitality. We learned to moralize our inability and stigmatize our capacity. We learned to bind our teeth and call it love. The result is a herd morality, useful for peace, not for creation. If that feels insulting, pause. He is not using herd as an insult, but as diagnosis. We are social animals whose primary fear is exile. We perform decency to keep our membership card. We feel moral when we are compliant. Our conscience rewards us with a sweet numbness for being easily handled. The danger is not morality itself. Every life needs a table of values, but that the table is set by feelings we do not understand. If your virtue is an anesthetic, you will never ask whether your best days feel like waking up. The suspense builds here because the enemy is not out there. The enemy is an inner policeman who speaks with your grandmother's voice, your school's motto, your algorithmic feed. He is subtle. He tells you that others' victories should cause you indignation. He curates your compassion so that it kneels always in the same direction. He calls certain ambitions ego and others service in a way that leaves you safe and bored. He is efficient. He keeps you from dangerous joys. Nietzsche wanted to give language to a different force, call it the will to power. Not a lust to dominate, but the appetite in all living things to expand their form, to interpret their world in ways that increase their capacity to act. It is not cruel. It is generous in its own way. It is the plant pushing roots into soil. It is the artist experimenting with a new scale. It is you learning to suffer in ways that sharpen you. To create yourself, you must let this will examine your current life and ask, does this arrangement increase my power to say yes, or does it shrink me? The answer may be embarrassing. Your most admired sacrifices might be forms of capitulation. Your most secret pleasures might be seeds of a better discipline. He loved to disturb our reverence for one idea, that truth must be pursued at any cost. He thought truth is a value like any other, and life, not fact, gets to judge it. If your truth makes you weaker, colder, more compliant, more resentful, should you worship it? Or should you ask whether your so-called truth is just a useful fiction someone smuggled into your house? This is dangerous territory. If all values are interpretations, then what makes yours better than mine? His answer is unflinching. That which increases the breadth and intensity of life deserves to win. Arguments are masks worn by forces. The question is, which forces are you strengthening with your arguments? This is not an invitation to chaos. It is a call to craftsmanship. He speaks in a tender register about giving style to one's character. Imagine your scattered impulses, your mottled weaknesses, your glints of excellence, your ridiculous obsessions, all of them like raw marble. To give style is not to sand everything into a bland smoothness. It is to choose, to accentuate certain lines, to let the imperfections become part of the pattern, to decide what is prominent and what is background. A well-styled character is not symmetrical. It is alive. You cannot give style by copying a template. You must stand before your life as a sculptor stands before a stone, asking what shape waits inside and how hard you can strike without shattering it. Suspense is also the fear that you will be punished for that shape. You will, not by gods, but by routines. When you begin to give form to yourself, the world that profited from your confusion will claw back. Your coworkers will ask why you no longer volunteer for the extra that earns you nothing but their gratitude. Your family will ask whether the new silence is arrogance. Your old self will ask whether you are becoming cruel. Nietzsche would shrug. Creation is cruel to inertia. He would not apologize. He would remind you that your experiment with life requires new conditions. Solitude, risk, enemies worthy of you. Choose them. He liked to say that you can tell a lot about a person by whom they choose to fight. The task, then, turns tactical. If you are going to create yourself, you must change your diet, and he meant the whole diet. Words, climates, friends, responsibilities, streets you walk, the music that refuses to leave you alone. He treated habits as instruments. He treated moods as weather to be learned, not obeyed. He kept notebooks as if they were laboratories. The mind is not a throne. It is a tool. The body is not a servant. It is a council of forces that knows, before you do, what makes you strong. He trusted the body's verdict more than the intellect's. He measured ideas by the taste they left in his mouth. Bitterness? Lightness? The urge to move? The urge to bow? Do not confuse this with self-indulgence. The pleasures he defended are not anesthetics. They are stimulants to higher forms. The self he urges you to create is not a brand. It is a capacity. A person who becomes themselves well does not become a narcissist. They become interesting. They crave depth. They can be generous because they do not give out of debt. They can be severe because they value time. They can laugh at their earlier convictions because they have metabolized them, not because they despise the version of themselves who needed them. There is a risk that scares even the bold. What if, in rejecting the morality you inherited, you end up empty? What if you remove the scaffolding and find there is nothing to build? Nietzsche's suspense does not dismiss this terror. It intensifies it then points to the next metamorphosis. The no of the lion must give way to a sturdier yes. You cannot live on critique. The dragon's carcass is not food. If you pause too long in negation, you will become a connoisseur of collapse, thrilled by the sensation of tearing down, bored by anything that smells like construction. This is the trap of many brilliant spirits. He watched them circle their own demolition and called it clarity. He begged them to risk naivety again. The child waits at the edge of this trap. The child is the strange courage to vow without a guarantee, to begin a practice that cannot justify itself ahead of time. It might be a craft. It might be a vow of solitude. It might be the study of a difficult art. It might be a friendship with someone who does not flatter you. The child accepts a certain ignorance. You do not know how the next decade will judge you. You do not know whether your experiment will become fashion or ruin. But you know something that matters more. You would rather build a life that tastes vivid and costly than remain a spectator in the cheap seats of your own existence. You can feel the pressure change. Suspense becomes resolve. The enemy is still inside the house, but now you know where it sleeps. The dragon's scales reflect your own face. Every thou shalt is a small, anxious version of you trying to keep the larger you manageable. And something in you, call it the will to become, has begun to step around it. In the corner of your room, the whisper returns, not as a command, but as an invitation. Would you like to know what it feels like to say yes to a life that you are actively building? There is a switch in perspective that changes the whole landscape. You have been taught to think of the self as a substance, a pearl at the center of your experience, a nugget of identity that waits to be discovered. Nietzsche tilts the map. You are not a substance. You are a process, a crossing of forces, a weave of impulses, a rhythm that falls into patterns. The I that speaks is a surface on which 1,000 small wills write their graffiti. Your thoughts are symptoms of something deeper, and that deeper thing is not a monolith. It is a parliament. If this sounds like an insult to dignity, test it. Think of your mornings, how you rise with a plan, and then watch another part of you sabotage it. Which you is the real one? The one who vows, or the one who breaks? He suggests a different question. Which you deserves to lead? The answer is not given by prayer or confession. It is given by cultivation. The self you create is the one you entrust with the reins, because it produces the most robust music when its hand is on the instrument. Self is conductor, not essence. The orchestra will always be discordant. The art is in arranging the discord so that it becomes a style. Style is not mere presentation. It is selection. To give style to your character, he wrote, is to survey your strengths and weaknesses, and then fashion a coherent whole that your eye can love. Even your vices must be edited, their abrasions turned to uses, their abrasions acknowledged and folded into the pattern. The point is not purity, it is integrity of form. You are not aiming at sainthood. You are aiming at a tone of life that makes sense to you when the night is loud and the world is indifferent. Interpretation for Nietzsche is not a hobby. It is the act of living. The world does not hand you meanings as mail. Values are not discovered like fossils. They are created like instruments are tuned, like meals are cooked, like paths are blazed. He does not deny reality. He denies that reality arrives already justified. You participate in justification. You test interpretations by the effects they have on your strength. This means that skepticism is part of courage, and that conviction is a style of health, not a trophy given by gods. Now the most frightening idea slides back into view. Eternal recurrence. It is not a scientific claim. It is a thought experiment heavy as a mountain. Can you take your life exactly as it is, its betrayals, its tedium, its small ecstasies, and not merely endure it, but affirm it? Not because it is the best imaginable, but because it is yours, and you made it worth repeating? You judge yourself by a standard too vast for any applause to reach. If you can answer yes to this demon, you have created a self that can carry fate without bitterness. If you must answer no, you have information. Your life, as currently arranged, is a no. Good, you have work. Amor fati is the formula he offers love of fate. Not resignation, not stoic acceptance, but love. Imagine loving your limitations as conditions of your dance. Imagine loving even the accidents and the losses because, without them, you would have been shallow. Imagine refusing to be the victim of your story. To love fate is not to agree that everything is good. It is to refuse the childish fantasy that you could have been handed a perfect script. It is to treat what happens as material, and to refuse to turn pain into moral capital with which to extort the world. The person who loves fate does not whine. They metabolize. They turn necessity into style. You can feel the texture of this self. It is light without being frivolous. It laughs not at others' expense, but at the absurdity of wanting guarantees. It is ruthless in its housekeeping. It throws out values that make it mean and keeps those that make it bold. It has patience with slow crafts and contempt for noisy anxieties that pretend to be conscience. It prefers the company of creators, even when they are dead, to the company of flatterers. It is not easily offended because it has better things to do. This is not a solitary fawn in the woods. It is a human animal who chooses their environment with care. Nietzsche talks about climate as if it were an ethic. He talks about altitude as if it were hygiene. He moves to mountains not because fresh air is romantic, but because it makes thought cut cleanly. He eats like a sick man experimenting with the instrument he has. He reads like a scalpel. He chooses enemies who will not let him get away with his worst laziness. If you cannot change your climate, you can change your microclimate. You can choose your inputs with the severity of someone who knows he is trying to create something rare. A self whose inner weather is not controlled by the mediocre. If you are waiting for permission to become uncompromising about the conditions of your work, here it is. Not because you are important, because your experiment is fragile. Most experiments die from contamination. He is warning you that resentment, gossip, duty to cheap causes, and moralistic chatter will infiltrate your laboratory and rot it from the inside. He does not say, be kind or be cruel. He says, be clean. Clean of noises that make you stupid, clean of projects that make you petty, clean of pride that keeps you from changing your mind. You will need courage of a strange sort to practice this. The courage to disappear from certain circuits of approval. The courage to be called arrogant by people whose judgments are for sale. The courage to watch a former version of you die with less ceremony than you expected. The courage to keep a promise no one will praise you for keeping. The courage to say, I was wrong, not as a performance, but as a daily housekeeping ritual. The courage to build slowly in a culture that rewards you for announcing quickly. At the root of this courage is an unromantic truth he repeats like a drumbeat. We are the inheritors of instincts trained in cruelty. Civilization turned outward cruelty inward. Conscience is a wound that learned to speak. If you do not learn to use this inward cruelty on yourself soberly, artistically, It will use you, turning your days into a courtroom where you are both prosecutor and accused. He wants you to redirect that instinct toward self-overcoming, not self-punishment. Chastise your laziness, not your life. Punish your cowardice by giving it work to do. The lash is not for your existence. It is for your trivialities. Do you feel the switch? The project is no longer discover myself, but organize these forces into a shape. The terms of praise and blame that you are handed melt a little. You ask of every petty drama, does this increase the intensity with which I can say yes to my days? If not, why are you feeding it? You begin to see how many hours you hemorrhage to the rituals of injury. You begin to see how many secrets you keep from yourself in order to remain liked. It is possible to misread this as a campaign to be invulnerable. It is not. He speaks of wounds he could not hide, and of the way sickness can become a teacher of slowness, sobriety, invention. He calls it great health, the kind that is earned by flirting with breakdown and learning how to recover better. The goal is not to be hard. The goal is to be elastic. A self that can take a blow, learn, reconfigure its style, and return to its life with greater appetite is not a fortress. It is a dancer. Somewhere in this intricate reorientation, jealousy loses its voice. It does not disappear. It becomes data. Anger becomes a tool rather than a home. Guilt loses its prestige. Sorrow becomes expensive spent on things worthy of it. Pleasure becomes discriminating. Boredom becomes a warning light. Change your inputs. Change your responsibilities. Change your altitude. You are not running away from the world. You are choosing which world to build your workshop in. The last piece snaps into view like a lock clicking. You do not need to convince others. You need to enchant yourself. If you build a life you would actively choose again, the judgments of others do not vanish. They shrink. Their gods are not your gods. Their dragons do not guard your gates. Your kindness, when it appears, is cleaner. It is not service to a vague humanity. It is service to the few beings you have chosen, with eyes open to love. There is a cost to all of this that cannot be paid in aphorisms. He knew it in his bones. The price of creating yourself is loneliness. Not because you disdain others, but because your laboratory is not a stadium. Because you have to protect your delicate acoustics from the roar. Because most of what makes you will be done off stage, in seasons when the world suspects you of idleness or failure. In those seasons, you will need a tenderness toward yourself that is almost secretive permission to be unfinished, to stink of clay. He wrote with the bravado of a man who needed it to breathe, and yet the pages leak a sorrow that is not performative. He lost friends. He lost health. He lost the fantasies he had about being understood in his time. He watched his words be bent into the shapes of minds he would have hated. He accepted that a creator's relation to their audience is indirect, delayed, often poisoned by the couriers who carry their messages. He learned to love posterity as an impersonal force. The day after tomorrow, and the day after that, where a reader might take the hammer, not the idol. You can feel the temperature drop when he speaks of laughter. Not the laughter of derision, but the laughter that keeps you from drowning in solemnity. He loved to imagine dancers, tightrope walkers over abysses, spirits who do not make tragedy smaller, but make themselves larger. He wants your shoulders to carry weight without slumping. He wants your eyes to sparkle, even when the sky is iron. He wants your yes to be contagious. This is the emotional gravity of his project. It refuses to choose between dignity and joy. Dignity that dries into pride is a sarcophagus. Joy that dribbles into hedonism is a nursery. He wants you to be old and young at once, precisely because you will never be either long enough. He does not flatter the courage it takes to become yourself. He suspects it may break you. He knows that in some lives, the cost is madness. He knows the line between necessary isolation and pathological isolation is thin and walks in fog. He offers no guarantee that your experiment will not eat you. He offers only this: there is no life insurance worth the premium of never risking your own form. You can be praised as good, useful, cooperative, and still die having never made a single deliberate cut into your marble. He envies the one who risks the cut and loses a hand more than the one who never chipped a flake. There is a gentler note, almost a lullaby, in his insistence on selecting what deserves your sorrow. Not every fall is tragic. Not every abandonment is betrayal. Not every pain is an injustice. The universe is not aiming at you. Much of what hurts is weather. He suggests the dignity of shrugging where you once wailed. He suggests the discipline of turning even grief into a craft. If you cannot avoid it, at least suffer in a way that yields clarity rather than bitterness. Love your fate does not mean love your abusers. It means love the fact that you are the kind of being who can take even poison and find a use for it. He is severe about the dangers of compassion when it becomes a theater for our vanity. He suspects that many who want to rescue others are secretly eager to avoid their own experiment. He is not cold. He is allergic to pity that humiliates. He asks for a harder compassion, to help another become themselves, not to bind them to your sense of what a rescue looks like. You should be as reluctant to save as you are reluctant to dominate. Both thrill the same cheap nerve. The better instinct is to protect space, to make conditions, to offer tools, and then to step away so that they can build. If you cannot tolerate their difference, you do not love them. You wish to reproduce yourself. His writing is full of masks because he wants to protect you from premature clarity. To state a doctrine too nakedly is to invite lazy believers. He prefers to write in riddles that require a worker, not a believer. He wants you to find your own muscles. He knows that the surface of a phrase will be used against his substance. He knows that misreadings are part of fate. He loves them anyway, because they are evidence that the will to interpret is alive. He trusts that the few who will meet him in the mountain air will understand that he was trying to make creators, not disciples. There is a confession hidden in all this. He loved the world and despised much in it. He loved humanity as a possibility and distrusted the forms it preferred. He could be unjust, impulsive, unfair. He could be piercingly fair to his enemies and oddly blind to the virtues of those he cut. He could write sentences that explode in your chest and then return home to a misery that would not listen to them. He was not a model. He was a furnace. What does this mean for you? It means you must stop looking for clean heroes. You must learn to take what you need from the impure. You must learn to be fiercely grateful and unromantically critical in the same breath. This is the emotional gravity of self-creation. It will ask you to grieve the selves you loved but could not keep. It will ask you to bury loyalties that no longer elevate you. It will ask you to risk being misunderstood by those whose understanding once made you feel safe. It will ask you to live with the embarrassment of being sincere in a culture that prefers a constant shrug. It will ask you to replace the narcotic of righteousness with a slower drug of practice. It will ask you to accept that some of your best work will be invisible and uncredited. It will ask you to keep appointments with yourself that no one else will know you missed. When you feel the collapse approaching, the temptation will be to return to the herd, to fold yourself back into a morality that tells you exactly how to be harmless and applauds you for being easy. In those moments, remember the tightrope walker. The rope is not over a picturesque canyon. It is strung above ordinary days. It runs across Mondays. It runs across conversations with people who would rather gossip than think. It runs across your own boredom. The rope is long. The fall is short and symbolic. You could step down and join the spectators. You could perform their outrage instead of building your character. Or you could keep walking, one deliberate, ridiculous step after another, toward a version of yourself who, if asked by the demon, would grin. The sky is still iron. The hammer still hums. Your workshop still needs sweeping. The world still insists upon its tragedies. But you have shifted something. You are willing to pay the cost. And that willingness, quiet, uncinematic, without hashtags, is the signature on the bottom right corner of the first canvas you can call yours. The voice returns again, the whisper, but now it sounds less like a stranger and more like an echo of something you said once and forgot. This life again. The sentence sits on your chest like a stone and like a blessing. You look around your room. You look at the tools on your table, the names on your phone, the promises written in a notebook only you will ever read. You look at the ghosts who gather every time you try to begin. You look at the dragon, boring now, scales dulled by how often you've stroked them. You look at the child, the one you once were, the one you are trying to become. The child is not waiting to be rescued. The child is waiting for you to remember how to risk. There is a quiet revolution in accepting that no essence will descend to save you. No revelation will rearrange your marrow overnight. There will be no fanfare when you stop poisoning yourself with jealousies and morsels of outrage. There will be no credits rolling when you finally tell a friend the truth or refuse another ritual of boredom. There will be only you, on an ordinary day, practicing the craft of becoming, such that if the demon asked you to sign for another loop, your hand would not tremble. Think of self-creation not as an edict, but as a daily composition. You rearrange your hours so that they do not cannibalize each other. You choose an enemy today, maybe your own haste, maybe the inertia of a relationship, maybe the app that eats your dawns, and you wrestle it into something useful. You choose a teacher, a dead one if you must, who demands more of you than your era does. You choose a pain worth having. You choose a joy that costs. You choose a luxury you will not buy because the price is a life you do not want. You choose a rule you will obey because it makes you bigger, not smaller. You choose to keep a promise no one else will notice. You choose to be interesting to yourself. This is not the morality you were taught to admire. It is not punitive. It is not scorekeeping. It is not a lens that shrinks others to make you feel expansive. It is a house you build for a person you are proud to live with when the world leaves you alone. Inside that house, cruelty becomes craftsmanship. Pain becomes information. Fear becomes a companion you do not let drive. Love becomes less sentimental and more muscular. You love fewer people more fiercely. You give them space to become and demand space in return. You maintain a garden of influences. You weed it without apology. You water the few plants that produce fruit. Do not pretend you are not afraid. Fear is a precise instrument when you are honest about it. You fear losing love if you change. You fear being ridiculous. You fear failing publicly. You fear that you are less than you hoped. Good. Put each fear on the table, cut it open, and design a way to live with it that does not require you to shrink. This may mean secrecy for a season. It may mean exile. It may mean an audience of none. It will mean, always, that you become a little allergic to applause that arrives too early, praise that makes you lazy, and condemnation that gives you a script to perform. The thought returns like weather. What if nothing changes? What if the world keeps turning, and your small discipline is a joke? Nietzsche would ask you to taste that thought in your mouth. Does it make you smaller or more alive? If the latter, keep it. If the former, spit it out. The demon's question is a filter. Send your temptations through it. Send your ambitions. Send your addictions. Send your friendships. Which of these would you endure eternally and call a blessing? Which are you cultivating merely because you cannot bear to admit you built wrong? The filter is not a tyranny. It is a mercy. It saves you from catastrophes of your own making by humiliating them before they have grown. He would give you this too, permission to be done. To be done with certain arguments. To be done with certain roles. To be done with certain wounds. To be done with the hope that someone will see you and understand without your labor. To be done with the fantasy that you can keep every promise ever extracted from you. To be done with the person you were at 17 and the person who keeps parroting them. Being done is not bitterness. It is the room your future needs. Walk outside for a moment. The air is cold or warm. The street is indifferent. Somewhere a person you love is making tea. Somewhere a stranger is collapsing. Somewhere a child is building a tower that will fall joyfully. Somewhere you are, again, 10 years old, not knowing what you will become, but certain that becoming is possible. Interrupt the adult's appetite for control with that child's appetite for beginnings. Start something small. Vow something quiet. Keep it, then keep it again. When you fail, do not perform contrition like a priest. Rethink your method like an engineer. Laugh like a dancer who trips and turns the trip into part of the step. If you were to stand at the edge of your life and look back as if it were a painting, what would you want to see? Not perfection, not even triumph. You would want to see coherence. You would want to see the arc of someone who learned. You would want to see scenes of lonely work and honest talk and sudden joy and a few clean refusals. You would want to see the moment when the dragon's glare became boring. You would want to see the day you chose your experiment over your reputation. You would want to see evidence of love that looked like freedom, not captivity. Creating yourself is not a rebellion against the world, so much as a participation in it at a deeper register. You are not escaping reality. You are writing with it. You are accepting that necessity is the co-author every artist must respect. Your yes is not naive cheerfulness. It is the affirmation of a fighter who has trained long enough to choose the fight. Your laughter is not a mask. It is a method. Your solitude is not a punishment. It is a resource. Your faith is not in metaphysics. It is in the strange fact that when you arrange your forces well, the world answers. There is a soft exhortation at the end of all this noise. Do not wait for the perfect moment to begin. Begin with what is nearest. A room to clean, a promise to keep, a body to move, a page to write, a lie to stop telling, a friend to disappoint honestly, rather than please falsely. Begin where you are stupid. Begin where you are proud. Begin where you are afraid to be seen beginning. the demon will keep visiting. You can make a home for him. You can pour him a drink. You can learn to greet his question with a grin that is not bravado but relief, because you built a life that you would choose again. If this opened your eyes, subscribe to Boring History, because the truth is never boring.